Before we begin, this story discusses industrial poisoning, corporate cover-ups, and the deaths of workers exposed to a toxic substance over decades. If that's something you need to step away from, we understand. Take care of yourself first. There is a mineral so useful that humans have been weaving it into fabric for 4,000 years. The ancient Greeks called it the unquenchable. It is fireproof, heatproof, an electrical insulator, and cheap to mine. By the 20th century, it was in virtually everything: walls, roofs, ships, brake pads, even cigarette filters. There is just one problem: it kills approximately 255,000 people every year, and the companies that sold it knew it would. They sold it anyway, for decades. Or every story in here actually happened. That's the part that should scare you. This is the Unlit Room. New stories every day, Monday through Saturday. Today, a miracle mineral, a town built on top of it, and the longest corporate cover-up in industrial history: Asbestos, Quebec. That was the name of the town, not a nickname. The official name on every map and road sign. The town existed because of the Geoffrey mine, a crater 1.5 miles wide and 1,100 feet deep, carved into the Canadian Shield. It was the largest open-pit asbestos mine in the world, and it sat in the middle of town like a second downtown, except this one was slowly killing everyone who lived near it. The mineral itself is ancient. Asbestos is not one substance, but a group of naturally occurring fibrous silicate minerals, thin, flexible fibers that can be woven like thread. The name comes from the Greek word asbestos, meaning unquenchable, because fire cannot destroy it. The Romans wove it into cremation shrouds so that the ashes of the dead could be separated from the ashes of the pyre. Charlemagne, the Holy Roman Emperor, reportedly entertained dinner guests by throwing a tablecloth into the fire and pulling it out unburned. By the late 1800s, the Industrial Revolution had found a use for it that went far beyond party tricks. Asbestos was heat-resistant, chemically inert, an electrical insulator, and extraordinarily cheap to mine. It was woven into insulation for boilers and steam pipes. It was mixed into cement for roofing and siding. It lined the hulls of warships. It padded the brake shoes of every automobile on the road. It was sprayed onto steel beams in skyscrapers as fireproofing. It was pressed into floor tiles, ceiling tiles, gaskets, rope, fabric, and, in one of the more darkly ironic applications, cigarette filters. At the peak of production, asbestos was in more than 3,000 commercial products. It was so ubiquitous that an entire generation of construction workers, shipyard laborers, miners, and factory hands breathed it in every working day of their lives without knowing what it was doing to them. That is the central fact of this story, and it deserves to sit for a moment. The mineral was everywhere. It was in the walls of schools. It was in the ceilings of hospitals. It was in the insulation of the homes where workers went to sleep after spending 8 hours surrounded by it. And the people who mined it, milled it, and installed it were never told what it could do. Micro cliffhanger 1. But someone knew. Someone had the data, and they made a decision about what to do with it. The first warnings came early, far earlier than the industry would later admit. In 1906, a British parliamentary committee documented the unusually high death rate among asbestos textile workers. By the 1930s, the evidence was damning. A landmark British study by Edward Meriwether and Charles Price established a direct causal link between asbestos dust and a scarring lung disease they named asbestosis. Here is what happened next, and it is the detail that separates this story from a simple tale of industrial negligence. By the 1930s and 1940s, insurance companies in the United States and Britain quietly stopped offering life insurance and disability coverage to asbestos workers. They had done the math. The actuarial tables were clear. These workers were dying at rates that made them uninsurable. The insurance companies told the asbestos manufacturers. They shared the data, they explained the risk. And the manufacturers' response was not to protect their workers. It was to suppress the data. Johns Manville, the largest asbestos company in the world, funded counter-research designed to muddy the scientific consensus. Company executives edited and censored medical studies conducted on their own workers. Internal memos, later revealed in litigation, showed that Manville's corporate medical director advised against informing workers of their chest X-ray results. His reasoning, in so many words, was that as long as the workers could still work, there was no reason to alarm them. They were dying. The company knew. And the company's position was that a dying worker who did not know he was dying was more productive than one who did. There is a term for this in the legal record. It is called the conspiracy of silence. Plaintiff attorneys coined it during the asbestos litigation wave of the 1980s. But the silence started decades earlier, in boardrooms, in medical offices, in letters between executives who understood exactly what the mineral was doing and chose, deliberately, to say nothing. Micro cliffhanger 2. And the mineral had one more advantage that made the silence almost perfect: the latency period. Asbestos-related diseases do not appear for 20 to 50 years after exposure. A shipyard worker who breathed asbestos dust in 1943 might not develop mesothelioma until 1970. A construction worker who sawed through asbestos cement boards in 1960 might not feel the first tightness in his chest until 1985. This delay was not incidental to the cover-up. It was the mechanism that made the cover-up work. By the time workers got sick, decades had passed. The specific job site where exposure occurred was often impossible to identify. The supervisor who had handed them asbestos materials without a respirator was retired or dead. The company that manufactured the product had been acquired, restructured, or dissolved. The causal chain between the fiber and the tumor was real, but proving it in court required connecting dots separated by a generation. Mesothelioma, a cancer of the lining of the lungs, abdomen, or heart, is caused almost exclusively by asbestos exposure. There is virtually no other cause. If you have mesothelioma, you almost certainly inhaled asbestos fibers at some point in your life. The fibers are microscopic. They are invisible to the naked eye, and once they are lodged in lung tissue, the body cannot break them down or expel them. They sit there, decade after decade, causing chronic inflammation that eventually triggers malignant cell growth. The death, when it comes, is slow. Mesothelioma patients typically survive 12 to 21 months after diagnosis. There is no cure. The fibers that caused it entered the body 20, 30, 40 years earlier. What makes the asbestos story so difficult to process is that it does not fit neatly into a single frame. Two arguments ran in parallel for decades, and understanding both is necessary. The industry's position, maintained publicly until litigation made it untenable, was that asbestos was safe when used properly. Dust was the problem, they argued, not the mineral itself. Proper ventilation and handling procedures could eliminate the risk. This was not entirely fabricated. Dust control does reduce exposure. But the argument was deployed cynically, as a shield against regulation, while the companies simultaneously failed to implement the very controls they claimed made the product safe. The counter-argument, supported by the medical evidence, was simpler and more damning. There is no safe level of asbestos exposure. The World Health Organization has stated this clearly. Even brief, low-level exposure can cause mesothelioma decades later. The industry's own insurance partners had reached this conclusion by the 1930s. The argument that proper handling made asbestos safe was a corporate talking point, not a scientific finding. Both sides agreed on one thing: the mineral was in everything, and removing it was going to cost more money than anyone wanted to spend. Micro cliffhanger 3. The scale of what happened next belongs in a different category entirely. 255,000 people die every year from asbestos-related diseases. That is a World Health Organization estimate, and it is likely conservative because many cases in developing nations go undiagnosed. To put that number in perspective, it is roughly equivalent to the entire population of a mid-sized city every single year. In the town of Asbestos, Quebec, children played in the tailings piles from the Geoffrey mine. The white fibers drifted through the air like snow. Residents hung laundry outside and brought the fibers into their homes on their clothes. The mine was the town's economy, its identity, and its slow-motion executioner. In 2020, the town changed its name to Val-des-Sources, a quiet acknowledgement that being named after the substance that was killing your residents was no longer tenable. And in the United States, the country that consumed more asbestos than almost any other nation on Earth, the mineral has never been fully banned. The Environmental Protection Agency attempted a comprehensive ban in 1989. The asbestos industry sued. In 1991, a federal appeals court overturned the ban, ruling that the EPA had not adequately considered the economic costs of prohibition. As of today, asbestos can still be legally imported into the United States for certain applications. Russia remains the world's largest producer, mining approximately 790,000 tons in 2020 alone. Pause. The insurance companies figured it out first, before the lawsuits, before the regulations, before the body count reached the hundreds of thousands. They looked at the numbers, how many asbestos workers were dying, how young they were when they died, how predictable the pattern was. And they made a business decision. They stopped covering those workers. Then they told the asbestos companies what they had found. And the asbestos companies made their own business decision. They buried the data. They funded junk science. They fought regulation for decades. And they kept selling a product they knew was killing the people who handled it. The mineral they called unquenchable turned out to be the perfect slow-motion weapon. It was invisible. It was odorless. It was patient. It could wait 20 years, 30 years, an entire career. And then it would find you. The fibers did not care how long you had been retired. They were already inside. The asbestos story is not a story about a dangerous product. Dangerous products get recalled. They get banned. They get pulled from shelves. The asbestos story is about what happens when the people who have the information decide that the information is too expensive to act on. 255,000 people die every year. Buildings constructed before the 1980s still contain it. Workers in developing nations still mine it with inadequate protection. And the town that was named after it had to rename itself because the word had become synonymous with a death sentence. The fibers are still there, in walls, in ceilings, in lungs. Waiting. The unquenchable mineral turned out to be unquenchable in one more way than anyone intended. If this one kept you up tonight, good. New stories every day, Monday through Saturday. Subscribe so the next one finds you too. Follow the Unlit Room wherever you listen. Tell a friend who cannot sleep. Full story on the main channel. Follow if you are wide awake. That was the Unlit Room. See you in the dark.